Hello, this is State Representative Robert Martwick, and it's March 7th, 2018, and we're in the middle of the legislative session here, and I'm coming to you with another one of my videos that I like to call Straight Talk Common Sense Solutions, where I break down the issues for you in a whiteboard fashion. Try and explain and help you understand the problems that we're dealing with and what the solutions are. So today, I'm here to talk to you about pensions. And I would say that of all the questions that I get about what goes on in Springfield, the vast majority of it is pensions or state finances. And let me tell you, that is exactly the same, because our state finances are entirely a function of what's going on with our pension systems. So I want to talk to you today, and I'm going to break this down. I'm going to talk about exactly what the pension problem is. Okay, I'm going to talk about what solutions have been proposed and what we can do going forward to potentially manage this pension problem. So let's talk about the pension problem. All right. So I hear much talk about the pension problem, right? So the problem is not pensions, okay, per se. That gets conflated a lot. People say, let's get rid of pensions, we won't have a problem. That's not true at all, okay? The problem is that the way a pension system works, like any other sort of retirement vehicle for investment, it requires the employee to make contributions, and it requires the employer, in this case government, to make contributions, and that money then grows with interest and provides for the retirement of the employees. Pensions are unique because, unlike a 401k, where when you retire, whatever's in the account is yours, pensions don't work that way. So if you put in money into the account and the money grows beyond what you are entitled to out of that pension system, you don't get the extra. Even though you're like, well, I put the money in and it's worth more now than the benefits I'm getting out, doesn't matter, right? By the same token, if the money doesn't grow because there are so many people into it, you're still entitled to a certain benefit level. That's why we call pensions defined benefit retirement systems. In other words, you're going to get a certain level of benefit, and when you invest, that's what your expectation is, right? So all of our employees are on pensions. So let me dispel a couple of myths about pensions, all right? 401ks are not better than pensions. They're different, okay? 401ks are subject to the whims of the market. Pensions are not. And pensions actually are cheaper to provide. If you have a group of employees and you want to provide them with a retirement, it's the cheapest way to provide the most resources to your employees is through a pension plan. So what happened in Illinois? Well, the simple answer is government mismanagement, right? And so what do I mean by that? Well, the employees contributed through their paychecks the amount of money that they were required to contribute, right? So depending on when you were hired and what went on, up to 9%, 7, 8, 9% of your salary was deducted and sent to the pension system. The employer was also supposed to make a required payment, but that's where you get into problem, right? So let's talk about the problem. The problem is not the employees, it was the government. The employees made the contributions out of their paychecks, it went into the system, but government underfunded pension systems for decades in Illinois, all right? So the problem is government, not employees, okay? Government, not employees. When the government didn't contribute to the pension fund the way that they were supposed to, they created a debt. And that debt grew, and that's called the unfunded liability. So this is a debt that we owe to the systems. What it means is it captures the present value if all the employees suddenly retired today, which is not going to happen. But if everybody retired today, how much would we be short? And the answer is 130 billion. Okay? So we owe $130 billion to our pension fund. And that's the debt that's crushing us. Why? Because if we're to pay it back timely, then what we have to do is we have to make payments that are based on math. We call that actuarial sciences. Currently, that's 8.5 billion. That's this year. Well, we're talking about a $37 billion budget. 8.5 billion, that's almost a quarter of the budget. The problem is that is going up, up, and up, and by 2045, $19.5 billion is what we're going to owe to the system. And that's the scary number right there. So these payments are going to keep increasing every single year until we get to 19.5 billion in 2045. By then, the fund will be 90% funded, which is good. But where are we going to get the money? The more we have to put the money into the pensions, the less money we have to spend on education, human services, infrastructure, public safety, things that we need, and the more it requires tax increases. And of course, that's what we want to avoid, right? So we have to find a way to pay back this $130 billion that somehow changes this ramp. So what are the solutions to this pension problem? Well, let's start out with this. The first solution that came up was Tier 2. And when I talk to people about pensions, there is one common theme. They say, don't change the benefits for people that are already retired. They earned it, don't change it, that wouldn't be fair. Change it for all new people that come to work. And I say, good news, we already did that. So, 2010, we passed pension reform that went into effect in the year 2011. So in 2011, you have an entirely new system with entirely new benefits. And here's the kicker. How much does this cost the taxpayers of the state of Illinois? Zero. $0 cost to the taxpayers of the state of Illinois for Tier 2 pensions. They are very, very, very austere. Much lower benefits, even though the employees from Tier 2, not the employees from Tier 1, which is the system we have the debt to, they're contributing roughly the same amount of money to their pension payments. But we changed them going forward. So that's a good step, right? So now we're not accumulating more debt on our pension system due to the Tier 2 employees, everybody hired after 2011, but we still have this outstanding $130 billion debt that we have to pay back. So that's Tier 2. Side note, Tier 2, as I've learned in Springfield, not every solution fixes all of your problems. Sometimes a solution fixes one problem and creates others. So Tier 2 made our pension systems more affordable, but it also made it really hard to hire certain people. So we're having a hard time hiring teachers. We have a massive teacher shortage in the state of Illinois because teachers are looking at how long they'd have to work, how much money they'd have to contribute, and what they get out of their pension plan, and they say, maybe I'll choose a different career. Our state universities, which used to be one of the great assets of our state, are having a hard time attracting professors because retirement is a function of their total compensation. And they look at Tier 2 and they say, that's not worth it for me. So it comes with its own set of challenges. But nonetheless, we did Tier 2, and that's creating a zero cost to the state. The next thing that we did was in 2013, we tried to pass, and I have it in quotes here, pension reform. The quotes are important because it really didn't reform anything. What it was a way of saying, let's unilaterally diminish the pension benefits that employees and retirees are currently receiving and employees were expecting to receive, right? So that was a way of saying, look, that $130 billion we owe, let's just say you don't get as much money as we promised you, we're just going to take that away, and that's how we'll lower that $130 billion. Well, there was a problem with that. The Supreme Court weighed in and said, unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court said that you cannot unilaterally diminish pension benefits. What did that mean? That our attempts to reduce that $130 billion failed. So we're not going to reduce the $130 billion that we owe by just saying, well, instead of a 3% compounding COLA, we're changing that. So we can't do that, right? So here's the pension problem. It's a debt problem. It's a $130 billion debt. New employees, No problem, right? $130 billion that we owe the system for the Tier 1 employees because we didn't contribute for decades. We must pay that back. And the question is, can we afford to pay it back? And the answer is, that's questionable, right? So let's get down to here. Solutions going forward. Debt management. So here's my approach to the pension problem. The Supreme Court has told us we must pay back this debt. We know it's massive. We know that the payments are going to be very difficult. So I'm looking at all and any ways to lower the repayment of the debt, to reduce the cost of repaying that $130 billion. So what are some of the things that we can look at? Well, number one, I'm looking at a thing called bonding the debt, right? So what this would say was, we owe $130 billion, and we're going to have to pay it back at a surprisingly high interest rate to the system. That's what the actuaries tell us. What if we went and borrowed that money and put it into the systems and then made the returns off of that? If the returns that we make on the system, the investments, are greater than the interest we have to pay on the bonds, well, then we can save the spread. That's called interest rate arbitrage. University of Illinois professor by the name of Professor Ron Fang, who is the head of actuarial sciences and a mathematician, came to me with a plan to do this. It would require us issuing bonds to cover this pension debt, putting the money in, topping up the funds. He says it would save us roughly $100 billion over 27 years. Sounds good, right? True. What's the problem? Well, no one's ever sold $100 million worth of bonds. In fact, I think the biggest bond offering ever was $40 million. So the financial industry, not very receptive to the idea. Not yet. But nothing is impossible. What are other things we can do? Well, one of the things that we passed last year is called Tier 3. Okay? Does this save us $130 billion? No. It maybe saves us somewhere in the vicinity of $50 or $60 million a year. But again, if we're trying to manage the debt, what you do is you look at every little possible savings you can. What does Tier 3 do? Tier 3 creates sort of a hybrid system. That means, unlike a pension where employees get just that defined benefit payment, Tier 3 would be a hybrid. So it would be like a partial pension and a partial 401k. This would also shift some costs to local school districts to pick up part of the pension. It would save the state a little bit of money. We're working on the implementation of that as we speak. Another area that I've looked at is called discounted present cash value buyouts, right? So the Supreme Court says you can't just suddenly reduce benefits, right? You can't do it unilaterally. But what they didn't say was that you could not negotiate with the employees. So what's the idea? Employee retires, and that employee is entitled to, under the old Tier 1 system, they're entitled to a 3% compounding COLA. Well, I have a plan that would allow us to offer to that employee a 3% simple COLA plus cash up front. And this is what we call discounted present cash value buyout. So we can say, here's what your Tier 3 or Tier 1 compounding 3% COLA is worth to you over your life. And here's the difference between a Tier 2 simple COLA, and we will buy you out of that COLA at cash up front. The more employees that exercise this option and take this, the more money the system would save. Early retirement. So in the past, early retirement has always been thought of as it was a way that we sweetened people's pensions to buy them out of the system because it was better for present operations to get their high salaries off. So we'd give them a pension sweetener. Well, we got rid of that, right? But it's amazing because there's a lot of people working in government who would still like the option of retiring early. And so we said to ourselves, well, what if we flip-flop that? If you want to retire early, you can do it, but for a reduced pension. So again, it's sort of a buyout. We'll let you retire early if you take a reduction in your cost of living adjustment or a reduction in your annuity so that it works for us. Again, is it save us $130 billion? No, but every little bit. It's about counting every little bean so that we're responsible with the taxpayers' money. Finally, a plan that's been talked about is called reamortization of the debt. Now, this is one that I'm a little bit more skeptical of. It definitely helps us in the present, but it pushes this 130 billion out. So we're on this ramp that says over the course of the next 27 years, we have to fund by 90%, right? The idea with reamortization is, and that's why these payments go from 8.5 billion to 19.5 billion over the course of the next 27 years, so that we get step that funding up to top the funds off to 90% of the fully funded level. Reamortization says, well, why do we need 90%? No one's ever going to retire all at the same time. So if we change the ramp where we would, instead of planning to pay back 90% of the 130 billion by 2045, we would change that to go from 40% funded, which is where we currently are, to 70% funded. That would have plenty of money in the accounts to allow us to pay for current operations, but they would still be structurally underfunded. Reamortization is sort of a combination of changing the payment schedule and including bonds, because it would require you to issue bonds up front to help top off the funds early, not $100 billion of bonds like we would do with the bonding of the debt. But these are all measures that we can do that can start to eat away at this monster of a debt, $130 billion. So in sum, right, the government created this problem, and the government has to fix the problem. Unfortunately, in our country, we're the government. And so we've got these prior generations that left us with this debt, 130 billion. We're on a payment that we probably can't afford, and we're limited with our options. And so what we need to do is explore any and all measures to make sure that that repayment of the debt is done at the lowest possible cost to the taxpayer. Another thing I advocate for, I really think that it would be wise, just like if you had a credit card, we should be putting additional money above and beyond. That creates a budget problem, but if we were to do something like a graduated income tax, where people in the middle class pay no more than they're currently paying today, but we tilt the rates up so that people who make more than, say, $250,000 a year have an increased rate, we could use that money to start paying additional money into the pension fund, lowering this sooner than later. The sooner we get through this 27 years and bring that debt down, the sooner we will have money available in the budget to spend on the things that we think matter, including lowering taxes. So that's the financially responsible way out of our pension problem. That's it in a nutshell. I hope it made some sense to you. I know that this is, I find this fascinating. I really didn't know much about it before I got here. I've learned a lot since I got down here. As the chairman of the pension committee, I'm trying to find as many ways as possible to do that constitutionally permissible debt management to try and save more money, get this pension beast under control, save the taxpayers' money, spend it on the things we want like education and human services, and ultimately lower taxes, but do it in a responsible way, not something that's going to wind up in a higher tax later down the road. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, complaints, as always, send me a message here on Facebook. You can email me at repmartwick@gmail.com. You can reach out to me at my office, 773-286-1115. Almost forgot my number there. And thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time here in Springfield, Illinois.